The cerebellum is the second largest region of the brain. The largest region we haven't covered yet, which is known as the cerebrum. The cerebellum is often known as the little brain because, again, it is the second largest region. Cerebellum has hemispheres, so it has a right and left hemisphere. And in between the two hemispheres, there's a region called the vermis. So in a mid-sagittal section, it's actually cut through that vermis. And the word vermis actually means worm. You definitely can't tell from this view how they came up with that word, worm. There's a few images in your book that might show a different view, but that center region, if looked at a certain way, looks like a worm. If you look at the interior of the cerebellum, there's definitely a distinction between tissues. There's an internal white matter known as the arbor vitae. And then it is surrounded by a gray matter layer known as the cerebellar cortex. The word cortex is used a lot in anatomy in reference to an outer layer of an organ. Then, looking from the outside, you can see folds in the cerebellum known as folia. So you can make out some of the folia here in this image. You can see some of the folia, the folds along this edge here. Whereas when we get to the cerebrum, a fold of the cerebrum is known as a gyrus, and a groove of the cerebrum is known as a sulcus. What does the cerebellum do? Well, it's involved in what we often refer to as muscle synergy. Muscle synergy is the precision that many of your muscles require. What this part of the brain does is, instead of just causing muscle contractions, it helps smooth those muscle contractions. So it influences the control of muscle coming from your cerebrum. So we're going to learn that muscle contraction is largely due to an area in your cerebrum. That's how you consciously control your muscles. The cerebellum adds this precision to your muscles. It gets information from the cerebral cortex and proprioceptors. Proprioceptors are monitoring your joints and muscle. So it gets information and helps to smooth out muscle contractions, give you more precise motor skills. So if you think about playing the piano, balancing on an object, or walking a straight line, that's largely based on your cerebellum. So in this way, we often think of it as helping to maintain our balance and posture. An interesting fact is that when someone drinks alcohol, alcohol is a nervous system depressant. It suppresses a lot of activities of the brain. One activity is your precision. It affects the cerebellum. So alcohol will suppress the cerebellum. You won't have as you'll lose some muscle synergy. You'll lose your balance as well. And that's what a sobriety test does. It measures the ability of someone to balance. It measures the ability of someone to have precision to their muscle movements. And you can learn a lot based on the inability to do those. Damage to the cerebellum, or even suppression of the cerebellum using alcohol, is characterized by an ipsilateral loss of equilibrium, balance, or motor coordination. Now, ipsilateral means same side. Many functions of the brain act contralaterally. So when we get to the cerebrum, we're going to learn that the right side of your cerebrum controls the left side of the body. Therefore, it's a contralateral function. The cerebrum works, or the cerebellum works ipsilaterally, so it controls the same side. Alcohol is going to suppress both right and left. But let's say there's a tumor in the right side of the cerebellum. you might lose equilibrium and balance on that same side, not the opposite side. So that is the cerebellum. The next region of the brain is the largest region of the brain. It's also the more complex region of the brain. It's also the part of the brain that you usually see most of when you're looking from the outside, and that is the cerebrum. The cerebrum contains a lot of different areas in it. It's very complicated, but one way we can simplify it a bit is first define 3 types of areas in the cerebrum. One are the sensory areas. There's a number of sensory areas that are going to be getting the sensory information so you can perceive it. So it allows you the perception of the sensory information. So for example, it's going to have a visual area. A primary visual area is going to allow you to perceive what you see. It has an olfactory area. That's going to allow you to perceive what you smell. It has an auditory area that allows you to perceive what you hear. So those are all sensory areas. They help in the perception of the sensory information. There are also motor areas in the cerebrum. Motor areas are going to be sending out nerve impulses that control some sort of an effector. For example, skeletal muscle. Your cerebrum controls and stimulates your skeletal muscles. And this is a voluntary control. So when you're moving your hands, when you're moving your head, when you're moving your fingers, that's all emanating from motor areas in the cerebrum. And then there are the more complicated areas, referred to as association areas. Association areas deal more with the complex functions, what we call the integrative functions, where they will take in some of this sensory information, take in memory, add in some intelligence in order to make a decision based on that information. So integration means it gets multiple sources of information in order to make a decision based on that. So memory, personality, intelligence are some of the properties of association areas. So in the next video, we're going to look at some of the anatomy of the cerebrum and then dive more into these sensory, motor, and association areas.